Hi, I'm Stephen Powers, your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, I'm joined by Forrester's Vice President of Emerging Technology, Brian Hopkins, to discuss our annual Top Emerging Technologies list for 2024. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining today.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. We've been doing this list for a number of years. I think 10, 15? Let's talk about how the methodology changed this year versus previous years.
Absolutely. As you know, a couple of years ago, we really got serious about how we use data to find the top 10 or top 20 emerging technologies. And we improved that this year. I mean, generally, the methodology has been we look at what analysts are writing about because they have a pulse on the market. We look at what clients are asking about and searching Forrester.com. And the things we really added over the last few years are what is research academia doing in terms of the things that they're investigating, and what is industry doing in terms of the places they invest in. So we continued that methodology this year. One of the things we added in this year that I thought was really interesting is we looked at the venture investment arms of the Magnificent Seven firms, figuring that those mostly high-tech firms all have venture investment arms, and they're investing in the technologies that they believe are going to drive the future. And that we added that element into the analysis this year. And because of our rigor in how we've begun to use data over the last few years, even more deeply, and then adding in some analysis through some of the Genai tools that we're building internally, we're able to actually come up with some pretty unique insights this year about some emerging technologies that perhaps have been ignored in the past, or we have said aren't ready for prime time, that we think are this year. So I'm happy to talk about those.
So let's talk about some of those insights specifically. What are some of the general trends we saw from this year's research?
Absolutely. As you know, one of the things we do every year when we do this is we all source a lot of data, not only in the analysis I just talked about, but we also spend a lot of time talking to our analysts and spend time talking to clients and kind of pulling all this information in. And I spend, when I do this work, some time thinking like, what are the big things happening? What are the trends going on here that should really shape what we think are the most important emerging technology? And this year, three things really popped out, and you'll see those as we talk through the technologies we selected. First thing is there's been an awful lot of emphasis, specifically in many of the AI technologies that we've chosen, to think that it's all about task automation and efficiency at a task level. And to some extent it is, but one of the things that we found is that this task automation is not so easily translated into job replacement, right? Which is a lot of things people are scared about in terms of, where's automation? Is automation going to take my job? What does the future of work look like? What does the future of my business look like? And while we see an awful lot of task automation potential, it's sometimes problematic to translate that into actually replacing people or even measuring bottom line benefits at a job level. So that's one of the things we were thinking about when we begin to look at some of the top emerging technologies. The second thing we saw is that boom around Genai that we covered last year in our top 10 reports has continued, but it's also everyone's realizing that it's a lot more difficult to master than perhaps we initially thought when we looked at the magic of ChatGPT. And now we realize that actually creating applications that we can trust and that deliver exactly what we need to drive the value we want, we can actually only do that in a smaller set of use cases right now today. And that with a lot of application infrastructure and data and governance built around it. So it's proving to be a lot more difficult, and that's kind of exacerbated by the fact that the technology every week or every month seems to produce a new generation of itself that we have to keep up with. The third thing that you'll see in our emerging technologies is that the future really belongs to those with a foresight to secure the present. So there's a lot of security-related technologies in our list this year, and that's on purpose because one of the things we see as we go deeper into this kind of edge-enabled, AI-enabled future is these tools are enabling bad actors and expanding the surface around which our businesses can be attacked. So all these tools go both ways. You can use them for good or you can use them for bad. And so we think that firms that really understand this, it's a two-sided coin or a double-edged sword, and invest in securing the present will benefit as we accelerate into the future. So you'll see a lot of those themes in our emerging technologies as well.
Brian, before we dig into the list, can you just give us a quick reminder of how the list is organized?
Absolutely. The way that we organize the list, and we've done this now a number of years in a row, is we organize the technologies by benefit horizon. And we don't organize it by maturity because we think the word benefit horizon has a lot more meaning for clients. Because the one thing clients want to know about emerging technology is, when is it going to benefit me? When is it ready for me? And so we have this idea of short, mid, and long-term benefit horizons that we assign to these technologies based on our assessment of what the average client is going to see in terms of benefit. So for instance, the short-term benefit horizon technology, of which we have 4, means that the average Forrester client should expect to see a tangible return on their investment in 1 to 2 years, which is pretty short term. The midterm benefit horizon are things that are 2 to 5 years out, and we think the average Forrester client should see expected value in that time. So we don't say tangible ROI because it's hard to measure ROI in kind of a 5-year time frame for most technologies. But we do say that the thing that they expect to get from that technology, they should get in that mid 2 to 5 year time frame. That doesn't mean that more advanced clients can't get harder, more tangible benefits in the short term. It just becomes higher risk and harder. And then the long-term benefits horizon, we assign a 5+ year benefits time frame to. And so therefore, we really say that those technologies are not going to deliver tangible value for most clients for 5 or more years. And we use the word tangible value to really express the idea that it will be very hard for clients, most average clients, to measure and feel good that they've gotten the benefits, any benefits from these technologies. And again, that's the average client. So of course, there are clients who are accelerating through all of these technologies, but they're taking a lot of risk. They're getting involved in developing the technologies and they're seeing the benefits, but it is a higher risk proposition. So that's what we do with Benefits Horizon. We've done it, I think this is our 3rd or 4th year in a row. And it really does help clients answer the question they need to answer, which is, when is this going to benefit me? I will say that even though we assign benefits horizons to these technologies based on the average Forrester client, I encourage every client I talk to assign their own benefit horizon based on their attitude towards and their ability to take good technology risk. And that, is causing a lot of clients to really think about what they need to do and take some additional risks on these technologies where they wouldn't have in the past.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit more about Genai. So when we recorded this episode last year, Genai was exploding, and we've learned a bit more about that, Genai in the past year. So what Genai learnings played into the top 10 list this year?
So that's a good question, Stephen. Certainly, we've learned a lot about generative AI, as has everybody in the last year. I think the main thing that we, besides learning that it's harder than we might have initially believed, is that we needed to separate out generative AI for language from generative AI for visual content, because the tools being built around these capabilities are moving in different speeds and different directions. So while, yes, we will have multimodal models, and we think that's the direction of the future. So some of that visual content processing is brought into generative AI for language. Most of the multimodal models are still primarily language-based, and we see a separate set of models based on different AI methodologies for pure visual content creation and generation. And there's different use cases for these. So, and different business users who are going to be interested in these. So we've split those out this year, and we think that really makes a lot of sense. So that was one of the learnings this year. I think the second learning for generative AI this year is just the simple speed at which it's iterating. And that's important because it really requires our clients and us to kind of skate ahead of the puck, as it were, and kind of estimate what technologies you should bet on now in this space and where you need to invest in the future, which is something we all struggle with. Our clients certainly struggle with, and that is how to invest for the future when you need the benefits now. And that's only been exacerbated by the speed that Genai is moving, because a lot of the things that you have to do now aren't going to benefit you for a while, but you have to kind of look forward and say, am I going to need this capability to, for instance, generate different kinds of training data from a knowledge graph so that I can train new emerging models in the generative AI for language or visual content space, right? Since it's moving so quickly, it's almost imperative that you begin to invest for the future, which is coming much faster than we expect. So that would be a second learning.
Brian, is one of those types of Gen AI moving faster than the other? Is language moving faster than visual content or vice versa?
No, I don't think we can say that. There's an awful lot going on in both spaces. So, of course, there was a big announcement this last year with the Sora model from OpenAI being able to rapidly generate a substantial amount of very realistic content. It's another one of those stories of nobody expects how quickly this is moving. Generative AI for language, I would say there's more use cases around it, specifically when you take a look at how generative AI for language is accelerating things like Turing Bots for software coding or AI agents, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I think there's a bigger set of use cases around generative AI for language, but generative AI for visual content and its ability to accelerate primarily marketing and all the content and all the customization of that content in the marketing space that's moving very quickly.
Got it. So both of those are in the short-term horizon list. Let's talk about some of the other emerging techs that are in that short-term benefits horizon.
Absolutely. One of the things that, as I talked about, we generated some surprises this year. And one of the surprises we generated this year was IoT security, which the need and technology for securing IoT devices has been around for about as long as there's been IoT, which is 25, 30 years now. So it's hard to say that word is new. But one of the things we looked at when we did our analysis here is the simple trending up of interest and all the changes in the technology space in IoT security. So when we really looked at the data and looked at the importance of it, we said we absolutely have to put this on the top 10 this year. And so we did, and spent a lot of time with our analysts covering IoT security to think about actually what's different. And so what's actually happening in the IoT security space, and I'm going to paraphrase this, is there's been a lot of IoT security type solutions on the market for a while. But what we see is other vendors, let's say in the identity and access management space, recognizing that they need to do identity and access management out closer to edge environments where there are IoT devices. And so they're building IoT security technologies and capabilities into those platforms. So, and primarily these are focused on getting a handle and inventorying specifically what devices are out there and what firmware or software is installed on those devices. But still, that's a huge step towards being able to secure them. So we have this conflict going on between dedicated IoT security solutions and IoT security capabilities and other types of security tools. And it's creating a big decision for clients in terms of how you get your IoT security capability. And all the while, the expansion of the attack surface that is being driven by AI, or new kind of automation bots driven by AI or hackers can use these bots to scale the attacks they're making on devices, is making it more critical than ever that clients make the decision around an IoT security set of capabilities. And the challenge they're having is, where do you source them from? And so it's a really interesting environment right now and really important, which is why we put it in our top 10 this year.
Brian, before we move on to the next emerging tech, you hit on something that's interesting with all the issues around, Gen AI and security. What do you think about the trust in AI? Is it high? Is it low? What's going on there? What's the work that needs to be done there?
I think it's generally still fairly low. When we talk to folks about AI, specifically in generative AI, the thing that everyone comes back to is I think you hear the words non-deterministic, but what we really mean is that the results aren't repeatable, that you never quite know what's going to come out of a generative AI model. And that is quite rightfully, in the near term, got a lot of folks who care about or are professionals in the governance, security, and risk space concerned, as well as business executives who would sponsor a lot of these initiatives. So I think there's a number of kind of competing things going on today. You have to understand that there's a limited set of use cases in which this non-deterministic and sometimes erroneous set of outputs actually can produce applications that deliver business value. And there's a lot of applications and use cases where we simply can't have that kind of error. The other side of that coin is humans are very error prone as well. And yet we have human employees, of course, that we just have to manage the fact that mistakes get made. And so there's a fair bit of how do we deal with these AI software systems that make mistakes like humans do? And how do we put governance processes and manage them in ways similar to that we manage human workers so that we can get advantages from them that software gives us, the ability, repeatability and scalability and those things. So there's just a fair bit of that going on so that organizations can learn where it's appropriate to trust the current generation of these tools. And then there's an awful lot of work going on in the technology to create much more trustworthy capabilities in the future. Really interesting stuff that we probably don't have time to get into, but way down in the research of how do we get inside, as it were, the head of these neural network architectures, understand the thoughts and what's happening in the layers of neurons, and actually begin to develop methods to steer them and understand where they go off the rails and guide them back onto the rails. So I really think we're going to see over the next few years, 3, 4, 5 years, massive leaps in capabilities around these models' ability to be trustworthy, while all at the same time learning where we can trust these models as businesses. And those two will come together, and I think we're going to see some big improvements over time. But right now, the trust is fairly low. Got it.
Before we move on to the medium-term benefits horizon, let's talk about the last item in the short-term benefits horizon, which is Turing Bots. They moved from medium-term to short-term this year. Why?
Well, I think that's the big thing about generative AI and everything that's accelerating like Turing Bots is even the best, most experienced people in AI in the world are still being stunned by the speed at which these tools are advancing in their capabilities. But when you really look back at it, it's not all that surprising if you can track what's been happening with language models all the way back to 2013 and the kind of the word-to-vec initial release of capability by DeepMind, which is very stunning. So Turing Bots is one of those things where we came up with this term, I think back in 2020, to represent the idea that machine learning algorithms, if given enough training data through deep learning neural networks, can produce some fairly stunning abilities to reproduce things like code. And I remember one of our analysts, Mike Gualtieri, myself, and Diego Logidici, the three of us were talking about this. This was actually Mike Gualtieri's idea that we could have a deep learning algorithm, given enough training data, actually produce fairly usable code. And that idea was a little controversial back in 2020, but we went with it because we did see the potential. Then, of course, generative AI took off and Turing bots have accelerated. So what we finally realized this year is that these Turing bots would deliver benefits even faster than we thought last year. And we're actually seeing that play out. So that's why they're in our short term this year. It's really tough because Turing bots can do very advanced things right now, but there's still a relatively small percentage of code in production. But there's an awful lot of open source GitHub code being produced by Turing bots. And the ability of Turing bots to do more things around the software development lifecycle is only advancing. I was talking to a vendor just yesterday. One of the things we've thought about Turing bots is that not only can they help generate code and generate testing for code, but if we could combine these two things with some ability to analyze existing code, you could use Turing bots to eliminate a lot of the technical debt you have by looking at the patterns of the code you write and understanding that in certain cases, you don't have the right patterns of code deployed, and that's causing performance issues. And we could actually have a way for Turing bots to go in and help you identify and even fix those. So the ability for Turing bots to eliminate technical debt, optimize the code you have, kind of really serving that architecture and tech debt reduction function is something we thought about a few years ago, and we're actually seeing it play out today. So we're really excited about Turing bots.
And that plays into the point you made earlier, which was that this isn't necessarily going to replace jobs. It's going to help you do your job.
Absolutely. I mean, realistically, and of course, this is a point of debate, my opinion is that we're going to have far fewer actual true technical developers, but those developers will be much orders of magnitude more productive because they'll be able to spend their time actually orchestrating different kinds of Turing bots to help them build and deploy code at a much greater pace. I guess the debate is, are we just going to have more code because of that? And therefore, we'll have the same number of humans doing it, producing orders of magnitude more code. Or are we going to have less humans producing that code? So it's kind of like that's a debate up in the air, right? How much code are we going to have and how many humans are going to be producing it? My personal opinion is that we're going to have fewer, higher value, more creative developers contributing much more value into the software generation process through Turing bots. And a lot of the underlying plumbing and the stuff that we don't like doing will all be done for us. That's my particular opinion on this. But, it's open for debate right now. It's one of those things where we're kind of scratching our heads and let's see where this thing goes, because it is very exciting.
So let's move on to the medium-term benefits horizon. Quantum security, new this year. Let's talk about why it made the list.
There's been a lot of talk, as long as I've been covering quantum computing, which is about 10 years, of the quantum's ability to attack today's best PKI type, asymmetric key, technically, encryption. And quite honestly, that ability of a quantum computer to break asymmetric key encryption is still something that is perhaps a decade away. We did some detailed calculations in some reports that we published that put it a 50-50 chance around 10 years away. So that seems like a long time, unless you think about the amount of time that you want to have your information protected in case it's harvested today and decrypted later, and the amount of time it takes to put in a set of security capabilities that implement algorithms that can protect your data against the quantum attack that may happen at some point. So what this really means is that if you want to be absolutely safe to ensure that the things that the information that you're transmitting today over the internet, even though it's encrypted, remains safe, we think the time to begin investing in the infrastructure to protect that information is now. And that's also timed with release of some of the post-quantum cryptography standards from organizations such as NIST. So all this is kind of coming together, and we think that time that you have to really start investing in that infrastructure is actually now to ensure that you're completely safe, because there's any number of breakthroughs in the quantum computing space that could accelerate the timeline when our information actually becomes vulnerable to attack. But the really cool thing about how we wrote this emerging technology this year is the side benefit you get from investing in what we call crypto agility is that you're going to get a much more robust and security architecture that enables you to understand what crypto you have out there and rapidly swap out algorithms for new, better algorithms that protect you against things like future decryption by quantum computers. So there's a side benefit to investing in preparing for quantum computing today. You're going to get a much better security architecture and posture through that's going to benefit you in many ways beyond just quantum being ready for quantum attack. So we really think that paying attention to that today is going to benefit you in so many ways in the future, and that's why it made our top 10 list.
So Brian, how about AI agents this year? Tell us more about what the research showed.
Yeah, agents are probably my favorite emerging technology this year, and we've been writing about agents for at least 3 or 4 years now. We used to call them intelligent agents, which is like the technical academic term for AI systems that could actually go do stuff. Last year, we called them autonomous workplace assistants, based on a lot of the work that like Craig Leclerc has done in implementation of AI capabilities and tools like RPA or digital process automation. But it was all focused on back office work automation, which is where we were focused last year. Well, one of the things we began to see this year is that specifically through acceleration in the generative AI space, an awful lot of front office or mid office applications, customer facing applications of this, including products built around it, like I think some people call them digital doubles or customer service agents. So this year we decided to really expand what the emerging technology was and how it's playing out by rebranding it as AI agents. And we're really seeing kind of like two things happen there. Number one, an awful lot of products are being built, bringing in new generative AI capabilities where they actually, it isn't just about having a conversation like just a ChatGPT interface or a Genai interface, but it's more about asking beneath that interface for a set of software components that may be AI models to go get some stuff done and then report back. So that ability to provide a product or a service to a customer or an employee that goes beyond just answering questions, but actually goes out and gets tasks done as an agent would on behalf of, in a kind of the principal agent kind of relationship. So there's kind of a product facing capability that's happening. So we're seeing a lot of kind of agent based software tools pop up. But the really interesting piece is below that software, we're seeing a new agent-based architecture happen where we think that a lot of the things that we used to do in code, different kinds of code and with lots of different business rules, we're seeing kind of behind the scenes in the software, a new kind of architecture emerge using large language models and other kinds of AI models as the elements of the code. And how these models are working is they're taking tasks, breaking those tasks down into plans, and then coordinating the execution of those plans by calling different tools, code generation tools, database lookups, maybe some large language model type, prompt manipulation. There's all kinds of things going on. And so this agent-based architecture as a new software paradigm is underpinning a lot of the agent-based products that we see coming to market. So it's a kind of a really interesting time. There's a lot of attention being paid to this in the market today. In almost every forum we go to about what this agent-based architecture is going to do for both software products and software architectures. It's really quite fascinating. It's probably one of my favorite emerging techs this year.
Let's talk about autonomous mobility. Is that new on the list this year?
It is. We've been tracking it. It was in our top 20 list last year. And this year, our analysis showed that it has come to a point where all of our clients need to pay attention to it, no matter what industry they're in, because to some extent, it's going to impact them. And so we went off and had a team that are looking at this, and we're going to write a lot more research around it this year. But we call it autonomous mobility technology because it's not just the self-driving cars, which is what everybody thinks about, but it's all the technology around self-driving or autonomous mobility, which includes things like drones, and how these are revolutionizing certain sectors and industries. We think the two places where we're going to see the most impact of this technology are in urban and public domain transportation and in kind of commercial transportation and logistics. The idea of self-driving cars moving around the populace where we all don't have to drive anymore, we still think that's a fairly long way away, simply because of the difficulties that AI systems have navigating the physical real world. There's a lot of reasons why that's still really hard. But in more constrained environments in manufacturing, supply chain, and logistics, certain use of drones, certain use of self-driving cars for transportation, or in urban scenarios where we have more control and it's a tighter environment, we think that autonomous mobility technologies are going to have quite a big impact, even in the short term, in the next 2 to 5 years. So we think it's time for clients to really dive into that technology and pay attention to it, which is why we're going to spend some time on it this year.
We had two technologies on the long-term horizon, XR and Zero Trust Edge. Are they either of those any closer to reality this year than last year?
Yeah, those two were on our long-term list last year, and we maintained them on our long-term list this year instead of advancing either one of them. And, frankly, extended reality still, because of the advancements that the form factors need to make, and frankly, consumer readiness to adopt these technologies over, frankly, what works pretty well for them today, which are screens, devices, mice, and now kind of natural language interaction through generative AI. All that works pretty well for consumers today. And so consumers aren't ready to make the jump to that next big interface of extended reality, but we think someday that will happen, and that's going to be kind of the best next big interface change. but there's a consumer adoption and, some progress that needs to be made, and the convenience of these form factors, it's going to take a while. That said, we still see a lot of enterprise opportunities in some very narrow use cases, training and onboarding being probably the number one, extended field support being another one, where enterprises are beginning to adopt and make progress using new extended reality, which includes virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality form factors. So we maintain our position as we think the big impact of those, that kind of next big interface that changes the world, is still a good distance away. Zero Trust Edge, again, really interesting technology. It's kind of down in the detail and the weeds. We think whenever I talk to clients about it, that they need to pay some attention to it. And we still maintain that it is a number of years out for a lot of reasons. Number one, the vendors have a lot still to figure out in terms of making tools that combine networking and security and cloud enabling that all. The vendors have some work to do to make that simple for clients, and clients have a lot of work to do because Zero Trust Edge is essentially a cloud native approach to networking and security. Clients with a lot of legacy devices that don't use modern communication protocols that can be easily made cloud native, or clients who aren't necessarily deeply into the ability to manage capabilities and software packages and security through cloud native techniques and technologies, they're going to have a hard time with Zero Trust Edge of getting the benefits. So there's a readiness in the vendor perspective and a client readiness and a legacy device thing all kind of mixing around in Zero Trust Edge. And we think it's still going to take a while before that really delivers for most clients the benefits that we know it can. So we maintain those two as still in our long-term benefits horizon this year.
Brian, if there's one final thing we want our listeners to keep in mind as we wrap up our conversation, what would that be?
I get asked this question every year, and I say the same thing, and that's the pace of technology advancement is accelerating. And we're already seeing this, things like Turing Bots. Each year, we've advanced it from long-term to mid-term to short-term. And each of these technologies are interplaying with each other. A lot of these technologies are accelerating the other technologies. So I think it becomes even more important each year that we do this, that you have to begin to invest in technology in the foundations ahead of when you think you need them, because the need is arriving in many cases faster than you think. So that is always playing against that thing that we talked about earlier, which is trust. How do you trust in these technologies? And a lot of that trust is not only culture and process and just being able to feel good and safe about the way that you're applying these technologies, but it's also knowing you've done what you need in terms of the foundation, the data management foundation, the security and risk foundation, all the things you'll need to be able to trust these. So that's what I say every year. It's like clients have to recognize how these technologies, new generations, are stacking on previous generations, creating an acceleration of benefits, which means you're going to need those foundations faster than you think to be ready for the future.
Great. Well, thanks for the conversation, Brian. Really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us today.
You bet. I enjoyed it every year.
If you want to learn more about our top 10 emerging technologies for 2024, please visit forr.com/emerging-tech. That's FORR.com/emerging-tech. Thanks for listening.